What we're going to do now is put into practice the things that we've learned in the more recent lessons in the context of a small program. And so this program is going to read a CSV file containing student IDs and names. So CSV stands for comma separated values, and I've created a file here which contains 100 different student IDs and names. And so what we want to do is read this file, and then I'd like to split the students into 5 roughly equal sized classes, and then ensure that there are no duplicate student records for each class. And what we want to do is write the names of each class's students to a text file for that class. So what I mean by that is, so we end up with something like this. So as you can see there, we started with 100 students. There's 20 students on this list, and there's a few other lists. And so as you can see, they've all been split down into roughly equal size classes. The reason I say roughly is because I've put a couple of duplicates in there, just so that we can practice this bit, ensure that there are no duplicate student records. So if we go back to our CSV file, you'll see this one here, Edgar Flores. There's actually a duplicate there, and also this record here, Maria Marin. And if we look at the bottom here, we can see that there's a duplicate for that one. And so we need to write our program in a way which will avoid adding duplicate students to the classes. And so these are the things that we're going to cover: module imports, reading and writing to files and the different open modes, dictionary methods, setting nested values, i.e. when you have a deeply nested data structure such as a dictionary within a dictionary and you want to set values on the one which is nested within the outer one, modulo, for loops, unpacking, and iterable objects. And so in the next one, what we'll do is we'll start off by just reading from a file. So in this one, we're going to start off by reading from the CSV file. Now, you won't actually have this CSV file at the moment, so you can either create your own with 100 records and 100 names, or if you want to do this quickly, I've actually put the file on GitHub. So here I have a repository for my account. So it's at GitHub, GaryClarke Learn Python. And this actually contains all of the lesson files that we've actually worked on so far. So even if you're not familiar with Git, I'll show you how you can download this file. If we go to student segregator folder here, and then in there's just one record at the moment. There'll be more after I finish the lesson, of course. And so this is just called students CSV. Click on that, and so you'll see all the records here. And what you need to do, if you want to just quickly get a copy of this, you'll see these two little buttons here, raw and blame. If you click on raw, okay, then you'll see the raw content, and so you just copy all of that, and all you'd have to do is then just go and create a file in the student segregator folder which we've created. Call it students.csv, just like mine here. And then what you would do is paste the records into there. Now remember, what I did was I replaced a couple of the records with duplicates. So number 1 here, Flores, I replaced number 12 with that. It doesn't matter which ones you replace, as long as you actually do replace just a couple of them, or as many as you like really. It will work no matter how many you replace. Replace those, create duplicates, and then that way, when we come to actually making sure that we've written this program correctly and that there are no duplicate records, then you've got something to work with. We now have a student segregator folder. We have a students.csv file. What we need to do now is create a Python file where we can go and write our program. And so what I'm going to do is, in the student segregator folder, is I'll just create a Python file. I will also call this student segregator. And so our first task, read a CSV file containing student IDs and names. So remembering what we did when we opened files for reading, I'm going to let you have a go at this, a little challenge. All you need to do is Open the students.csv file for reading and then loop over the file object and print each line. And if you recall how we finished the lessons on reading and writing to files, and we used a context there where we use the with syntax. I recommend you have a go at that because that's what I'm going to be using throughout this tutorial. So pause me now, give that a go. With, open, and then the first argument for this is the file name, so students.csv. We're opening the file to read it, which means we don't actually need to specify an argument to tell it the mode, because read is the default, so we can just leave that, and then we say as, and then we just need a name for the file object. Let's call this student file or students file. Okay, and then now within our context we have access to the students file object, which is an iterable, and because it's an iterable that means that we can loop over it. So we'll say for line in students file, and then we'll just print out the line. And so what I'm going to do is actually, before I run this, I'm going to shift from the Learn Python folder into the student segregator folder, so cd student segregator, okay, and then that means I'm now in the student segregator folder. This stuff here, just ignore this for now. If you're unfamiliar with Git, what this means is I've created a repository, and so where I showed you where the student CSV file was on GitHub, I needed, in order to do that, to push to GitHub, I needed to create a repository, and so that's what I've done here. And maybe later in the course I'll include some stuff with Git and show you how you can version your files and add stuff to Git version control. Okay, but let's not get sidetracked. Let's actually get back to doing what we wanted to do. And so to run this file is Python and then studentsegregator.py. Okay, and as you can see, it's just printed out each line from number 1 to 100. So we have all of our records there. In order to get the individual values from each line, i.e. we want to split out the name from the index, we're going to use a special reader which comes from a module called CSV, which was designed exactly for working with CSV files. So back over in our student segmenter file, we just need to import that module. So import CSV. Okay, and what we want to do here is, I'm just going to remove this line and we're going to say reader equals CSV dot reader, and then what we need is the iterable file object, so the students file is the argument. And then what we will have then is something called an iterator. So don't get bogged down with all this terminology that I'm bombarding you with. All you need to know is that we're going to have a tool. This reader is a tool which will iterate over the file, and it means we can split out both the index and the name by using this tool. So reader equals csv.reader students file. And what the reader can do is loop over each line of the file, and then we can actually unpack each of the items, each of the values on each line into variables. So we've done this before, haven't we? Index and then a value, or in fact we're going to say index name. So index is the number and then that is the name. So for index name in reader, and what we'll do first is, just to make sure that this is working the way that we want it to, we're just going to print out the index and the name and see what we get in our terminal. So let's go and run this. Okay, great. So this is working perfectly. We've got now access to both the index and the name. We need to figure out what our next task is, and we'll do that in the next one. We now need to split our students into 5 roughly equal size classes. We have 100 students. 100 divided by 5 is 20, but how do we actually split our students into roughly equal groups of 20? The answer is modulo, and what I'll do is I'll quickly demonstrate that by just creating a little sandbox file where we can go and have a little play around and just show you what happens when we actually divide the student IDs by 5. Okay, so we'll just call this sandbox Python file, Okay, so number of classes equals 5. Let's actually set up a little variable. Number of classes, equals 5. And to demonstrate this, what I'll do is I'll just loop over the numbers 1 to 100, performing modulo 5 on each of the numbers. So for num in range, and we'll say 1, and we need to say 101, which will give us the numbers 1 to 100, and then I shall just print num modulo 5. Okay, let's go and run this. Python sandbox.py, and so what you'll see here is we're just getting the numbers 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 for each of those numbers. So we're never going to have a number greater than 4. That sounds okay, but we don't really want to have a class number 0. What we want to have is a class numbers 1 to 5. So all we would have to do is actually add a +1 on there. Let's run this again. And so this looks better. We get the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so by using modulo on the student's ID, we can actually place that student in a class number 1 to 5. Sounds pretty cool. What we shall do now is go back over to our student segregator file and actually just print out the class numbers, or print out the class number that each student is going to be in. So what I'll tell you for a start is that index is actually a string here. It will come back from the CSV file as a string. So the first thing we would need to do is cast that into an integer, otherwise modulo won't work. We will get a type error. So what we need to do is I'll create a new variable and we'll say id equals int, so that will cast the value to an integer, and we are looking at index. So now what we can do is actually print out, and we'll say id modulo 5 plus 1, and this should give us our class numbers, but I'm just going to do it one step at a time just to make sure that this is actually working the way I want it to. So student segregator, okay, and so we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What we can then do with that is store that in a variable called class number. So class number equals. Okay, perfect. And then what we want to do is actually start dropping the students into their particular class number. Rather than get bogged down in something overly complicated, what we'll actually do is I'll create a classes dictionary. So we already have a dictionary established, and in there I will have an index 1 to 5 and a keys 1 to 5, and each of those will be, the value for each of those will be a dictionary. We'll start off with an empty dictionary and we'll drop each student into their class as we go. So a demonstration would explain that better, I think. Classes equals dictionary, and then class number 1 will also be an empty dictionary. Class number 2 will start life as an empty dictionary. I'm sure you get the picture. And so what we need is 5 empty dictionaries. And in order to access the individual class dictionaries inside of the exterior classes dictionary, all we would do is we would just use the key position, and we know that the class number is going to be the key for the classes, the key for each class in the classes dictionary. So what we'll do, and all you'll see here is a bunch of empty dictionaries, but we'll try it anyway. So print classes, and then if I want to get a class number 1, 2, 3, whatever, all I would need to do is say class number, that being the key for the class. So we'll go and print this, and as you can see we just get a bunch of empty dictionaries for now. So what we need to do now is actually start dropping the students into each of those classes, and we'll do that in the next one. We now need to start dropping the individual students into their respective classes. So basically we need to start filling up these class dictionaries here. At the end of this, what we need to end up with is something like this. So this is one class dictionary, and as you can see it contains roughly 20 students, and they are keyed with the student ID, and then the value is the student name. and I'm actually going to let you have a go at this. Now, there isn't much code involved in this, but there is quite a bit of thinking possibly if you don't already know the solution. So have a think about how you access and how you add items to a dictionary, and then think about how you would add items to a deeply nested dictionary. All of the code or all of the values, etc. that you need are here. All you need to do is just simply adapt this with one line of code, and then that will give you your solution. Think about it, pause me and give it a go. Okay, so here's the solution. In order to get an individual class, this is how we did it. So we have classes, class number, and then we said that inside of each class, which will itself be a dictionary, we're going to add the records which will be keyed with the student's ID, and the value will be the student's name. So in reality, what that means is doing this: classes, class number, and then it will be, so now we are actually inside of a particular class. This takes us to a particular class. Say for example we are in class 3, and then what we need to do to add a student is we use their ID and then as the key, and then the value would be their name. Okay, and so that is literally all you need to do. Like I say, probably requires more thinking than actual coding for that one. So what we'll do now is we'll just go and print out one of these dictionaries, one of these classes. So print, and we'll say classes, and we'll just go with number 4. And so I'm just going to move back into the folder which I need to be into, students segregator, and this will be Python, and then again student segregator. Okay, and so there we have it. We have our class dictionary containing all of the students for that class. So how did you get on with that one? I hope you gave it a go. Let's have a look what we need to do in the next one. We've now got all of our students, we've got them in dictionaries. What we need to do then is actually start writing these to their own class files. So ensure that there are no duplicate student records. I'm pretty confident that there won't be, because if you think about dictionaries, the keys need to be unique. So even if duplicates were found, then what would happen, say for example with our, let's go and have a look at our duplicate here, Edgar Flores, with a key of 1, simply what would happen when it comes around to the key of 1 again is it would overwrite the existing key of 1 with the same value. So we wouldn't get duplicates in a dictionary. Our next step will be write the names of each class's students to a text file for that class. So what we're looking to get from this is to produce something like this, a text file with the names of each of the students for that particular class. But we will also need to create the text file itself with the class number, which might prove to be a challenge. Let's tackle that in the next one. Now that we've grouped our students into roughly equal sized classes, what we need to do is write the names of each class's students to a text file for that class. So I'm going to let you have a go at most of this. I've written out the steps to guide you, so let's walk through those one by one. So here's the overall goal: write the names of each class's students to a text file for that class. So if you follow these steps, which is well within your capability now, I think, what you would need to do is, number 1, we'll need a loop which will iterate over the class's dict items. Now notice I've capitalized items there, because if you just loop over a dictionary, what does it do by default? It gives you the keys, but we want the keys and the values, and so the way we do that is we use the items method. So a bit of a giveaway there, but I'm not going to give away as much for these next few steps. So then we'll have a class number, because our dictionary is keyed by class number, and then the actual dictionary containing the names is the value. So use the class number to create a classname.txt file. That should say file name. So you're creating a string which is made up of the class number and appending .txt. So you'll end up with something like this. You'll have class1.txt, class2.txt, all the way up to 5. Okay, and then you need to loop over the student names. So like I say, we're obtaining the class number and also the dictionary containing the names. So you'll have this information available to you. What I'd recommend is if you're not totally sure on how you do it, just experiment, print things out, loop over things, print things out, have a look in your terminal, see what you've got and figure it out from there. Okay, next step is to open the file. So open your file which has been created, for example class1.txt, for appending, and a bit of a giveaway, as class file. So use the context which I showed you where you say with open file as and call your file object class file. You can call it what you want, but let's stick to both doing the same thing. And then write the student's name to the file. So you're looping over the students' names, write the current student's name to that file. And that is the end of the code really. After that, all you need to do is go and check in your student segregator folder and see what files have been created. Check the students' names in there, make sure there's no duplicates, and that completes the exercise. So have a go at it. It might be quite tricky, but like I say, if you experiment, if you loop over and print things out, then you can figure this out. If you get stuck, then just come back and check my solution. So pause me and try that now. Okay, so we will need a for loop which iterates over classes dict items, over classes dictionary items. Okay, here's our classes dictionary, and so in order to loop over the items, and what I want to do is I want to actually retrieve the class number, which is the key, and also the value, which is the class dictionary. So the way I would do this is for, and I shall call it class number, and then I'm going to call it cohort, because cohort will be, we can refer to that as the group of students. So cohort in, and then it's classes items, and this should get me all of the keys and values. So like I said, with each step of the way, just print out what you get. So we'll print class number and we'll print cohort, and we'll just go and check this in the terminal. Okay, so a bit hard to read, not the easiest thing in the world to read, but you should see this here. We have a number 1, which is the class number, and then I have a dictionary which is delimited by the outer curly braces, and then we have a number 2, and then we have our value, which is an inner dictionary containing the students' IDs and names. So far so good. We've got quite a lot of data there which we can actually play with. Now what do we need to do? We need to, and I'll just actually indent this, use the class number to create a class name.text text file name, e.g. class1.txt. So I shall say file name equals, and then I'll use an F string, so well done if you thought that, class, and then class number, and then .txt, and so I'll go and print this out, and so we should see, because it's looping over every class, we should see class1.txt, class2.txt, all the way up to class5.txt. Anyway, like I say, each step of the way, just check your work, and that's the best way to work. Okay, class1.txt, class2.txt, so far so good, we're doing well. Now we need to loop over the student names. So here we are looking at the item which I called cohort, but if we actually scroll up and look at what each of these is going to be, if I can actually find one, it's going to be an ID and a name. We are looking for the names, so the names being the values. So how do you loop over the values in a dictionary? we use values. And so let's give that a go. Loop over the student names. So for name in, and we said cohort. And what I'm just going to do here is just actually print the name and make sure that that's what's happening. So I should get a long line of names now, hopefully. In fact, I messed up there, didn't I? Because like I said at the beginning, so that's a pretty good demonstration actually. By default, just a little reminder, a dictionary will return the keys. However, we're after the names, so well done if you spotted my mistake there. For name in cohort values, so this should give us the names in the dictionary, so we get a big long list of names, because remember this is covering, we're looping over every single class at the moment. And then what we need to do is open our file for appending. Okay, so do you remember how we opened a file for appending? We said with open, and then it will be file name, and for appending we use a, and then as, and we said we're going to call this class file. So this will give us an iterable file object. And so what we need to do now is write the student's name to the file. So I'm just going to indent these, and you remember how we write to the file, class file, write, and then the data which you want to write, which is our student's name. So I'll just remove some of this, write name. Okay, and that is it. The file will actually close itself. We don't need to do any file closing. What we need to do now is we'll take this back to the baseline, check your folder for the created file. So once we've run our program, so I need to go and run this. I'm not printing anything out, so I won't see anything in the terminal, but hopefully in my student segregator folder I should now see 5 new files, and indeed I do. So class1.txt. Okay, have you noticed the mistake we've made here? We didn't actually use new lines at the end of each one, so let's actually go back and fix that before we go any further. What I'll do is I'll just delete all of those. So yeah, making mistakes, it's all part of it really. Just making mistakes, going and checking your work in your files, checking the terminal, and then you can see what improvements or what changes you need to do from there. You'll never get everything right first time. I certainly never do. Okay, right, we need to do this in an F string, don't we? So F. So this is more complex than what I actually initially thought. So F, and then a new line, and then we'll close that. And so this should write it to the files correctly, hopefully, all in columns. Okay, let's go and check our work. Okay, that's better, isn't it? So we have 20 names there. I can't see any duplication. One of the files, or at least one of the files, should contain less than 20 because we started out with duplicates. Okay. That one contains 20. Okay, and this one contains 18. So we had 2 duplicates. 20 minus 2 is 18. So I'm satisfied that this has worked correctly. So how did you get on with that? I hope you gave it a go. Like I say, having a try at these things, experimenting, printing things out, doing things one step at a time, that is really how you learn. And so if you did do it, even if you got it right first time, or if you needed to check my solution, well done for giving it a go anyway. And let's now move on. If you've enjoyed this video and you'd like YouTube to show you more of my content, all you need to do is subscribe and click the notification icon. Each week I release a number of new recordings. If you'd like to be informed about my upcoming videos, as well as receive exclusive content, discounts and early access to my new videos, you can join my mailing list by following the link underneath this video.